Good afternoon, everyone. This regular council meeting of October 23rd, 2023 is called to order at 4 o'clock. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelethat on whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Audience members and delegates are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube and Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. Are there any late items? Seeing none, the Ucluelet Consumer Cooperative Association requested that their application be withdrawn. As this application relates to report item 7.1, we will not be dealing with that report this evening. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Councillor Hoare.
I'll second.
Councillor Mafty. All in favor? That carries. The next item is 4.1, October 10th, 2023, regular minutes. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adopt the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Councillor Mafty.
Second.
Councillor Kennington. All in favor? And that carries. Is there any unfinished business? All right, the next item is a Committee of the Whole report. I would like to make a motion to go into Committee of the Whole. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second
that. Oh,
Councillor Anderson? All in favor? That carries. The first Committee of the Whole report is item 6.1, Visitor Parking Program. This report will be presented by the Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before Council today is a first report with respect to a visitor parking program. Council in February of 2023 requested staff take a look at opportunities for additional revenue generation to help deal with the forecasted infrastructure deficit that we know the municipality is experiencing, and opportunities to augment resources so that we can deal with some of the infrastructure that we have and upgrades that we need to address moving forward. Part of the rationale there was that we're taxing local residents and bringing in property taxes to deal with some of that, but the municipality has limited abilities to access direct revenues from visitors that utilize that infrastructure as well. So staff took a look at different opportunities, and there's only so many, there's actually very limited opportunities for a municipality to generate additional revenues. But one that jumped out and is being used in other communities on the West Coast as well as throughout, more urban areas, but also throughout the province, is parking programs. So staff took a high-level look at the possibility of implementing a visitor parking program, what the potential revenue could be from a implementation of a parking program, and what type of impacts that might have. So the report in front of council, or the Committee of the Whole, is to sort of open up that discussion to see if this is something that council and the Committee of the Whole would be interested in having staff explore further, with the possibility of implementing the program. In order to do this high-level review, there are some sort of key aspects of the program that we made assumption moving to give council a starting point, and one of those is that the revenue generating program needed to pardon me for a second. The intent of anything that we needed to do is to help reduce the long-term borrowing requirements for the water treatment project, reduce the anticipated borrowing requirements for future possible fire apparatus, which we know is coming, funding and replacement of maintenance and aging infrastructure, to deal with the increased cost associated with bylaw enforcement, parks and trails maintenance directly related to increased visitor presence, offsetting the impacts of tourism-related increases in population on infrastructure, as well as funding of statutory and non-statutory reserves to allow for the effective funding and leveraging of funds against provincial and federal grant programs. So that's kind of the intended opportunity for any new funds that we have and existing funds. So what we came up with is a visitor parking program. So, and some of the aspects of this program were that it's not intended to access additional revenues from residents, right? They're already paying their property taxes, so there's no intent of actually gaining additional resources or having additional expenses to local residents that live here permanently. So any program that would be implemented would be focused on visitors coming into the community. So all permanent Ucluelet residents would be exempt from the program. That nominal cost recovery fee could be considered for West Coast permanent residents. So there's a cost for anything that we do. So that's something to be considered. That it should be a blanket parking program. So Ucluelet right now does not have a parking problem per se. So we don't have to move people out of our downtown area. We have upwards of 840 parking stalls throughout the community, in the downtown core, out at the Lighthouse, Browns Beach, Big Beach, etc. So we don't have to shift people. We don't have to move them along outside and keep them going to open up new spaces. So we're doing pretty good for our parking levels at this point in time. So we didn't need a parking program that encouraged people to stay shorter periods of time. We wanted it to be simple, so a flat daily rate. So people come in, pay a $5 or a $10 nominal fee, and they can stay the day and enjoy all the different areas of the community. And they don't have to worry about spending $2 an hour or $3 an hour throughout the community, depending on where they are and what they're planning on doing. So a very, very simple system. And then a kiosk or digital payment system for managing it. Those are sort of the basic overview program principles that we came up with. And there is a number, the report outlines the different pros and cons associated with that, and I'm happy to go through those if council wishes, but I'll skip past them at this point. The other aspects of a parking program will be the enforcement. So there's a lot of variables that could be considered with council as to the level of enforcement. We are a resort municipality, so we want that visitor experience to be positive. Worst thing to do is come visit a community and get a ticket. So our initial thoughts are that it would be a warning type system. It'd be pretty low key, but enough. If you don't have any enforcement, then people will ignore your system completely. So you need some level of enforcement. You could go up to a full enforcement program similar to that of other communities with a parking enforcement team. But at this point in time, staff isn't really recommending that would be the level of enforcement that we would need at this point. I think it would be overkill. For general impacts, we don't believe that it would have a significant impact on the community or businesses. A parking program that, if done at a nominal fee, $5, $10, is not a huge amount when you're considering the meals or the accommodation rates that are out there right now. People coming out to our community are making quite a significant journey already. A $5 or $10 fee is unlikely to change their behaviors and their habits if there's a parking program. There's a lot of just anecdotal information from conversations with visitors and friends that come out that are surprised somewhat that we don't already charge for parking. But we could do more research with respect to that if council desires. The operational expenditures do need to be considered. So the operational expenditures usually for most of these contracts are with a third party or party that manage the online platforms, the kiosks, and possibly the enforcement, depending on which route council decides to go with, if a parking program is desirous. But there's generally we would enter into an RFP with proponents, see what they have to bid on, what those rates are. Usually there's a flat rate plus a percentage of the total revenue generated. So you wouldn't end up in a situation, or a very unlikely situation, where you would enter into a deficit situation for parking, because there's the minimum rate and then a percentage of the gross revenues that are generated. So as long as you're covering off that first bit, you should be good. The estimates that we used, and we were trying to be very cautious about our revenue forecasting. So what we did is take a look at the total number of rooms that the municipality has, which is just shy, or 839. And we said, 4 people to a room, so there's 210 vehicles, and then we kept on dividing that up by basically 50% to come up with about 105 parking days for all of those rooms in January, with a maximum of 400 parking days, or 399 parking days in August, in the peak of the season. We think those are fairly low estimates, and that would equate to about $60,000 in July, or $16,000 in January at $5 a day for a parking fee. Cumulative, factoring out using the AirDNA stats, is about $461,000 of potential revenue. Now, this does not include any day visitors to the community. It doesn't include anybody coming, say, from Port Alberni, or visitors that are staying in Tofino and then coming out to see the Wild Pacific Trail, or to visit the downtown shops in Ucluelet. So this, we feel, is fairly pessimistic in the revenue source, but that's better to be on the low side than the high side. This would be gross, so you would have to take the operational expenditures off of that, probably about 50% of this minimum aspect, so about 200 if we had to guess. So at this time, that's kind of that very, very high level overview of what we were looking at, and I think during the committee of the whole, it's good to have that conversation and just ask questions and see if I can answer any of the questions or concerns that council may have with respect to the proposed program. And again, the intent of this report is to find out, is this something that council wants to pursue at all? Do we want to do more outreach to the community, or move forward with a request out to some proponents to find out what the actual cost would be, do some more digging into revenue generation, and have more accurate numbers for council to consider? So this is sort of that first stepping stone to find out, is this something that we should be pursuing or not? So at that point, I'll leave it to council for questions, and happy to detail out any more of this report if desired.
Thank you. I'll start us off. I would rather see it be, I like the fact that it's a visitor parking fee. That's a great way to put it. I would rather see it be $10 a day. I like the flat rate idea, but I would like to not have to charge our neighbors, the Ucluelet, the Toquat, Tofino, and Area C. I would like them to not have to be charged anything. That is just how I feel about residents versus visitors. But happy to entertain comments from council.
Through the mayor, I just had one question, I guess. Seasonal workers, so they're not making a ton of money, and they're coming in their vans, and sometimes they're sleeping in them, but that's not the point. The point being that we have a seasonal workforce, which is already kind of hard to attain. Are there any provisions for seasonal staff to be exempt as well?
I would imagine that if you're you are living in the community, or if we're extending it to anybody that works or lives in on the West Coast, that there would be easily able to put in a provision to allow for exemption from any parking fees for anybody that's working here. Yes.
So could we do that by way of a letter from your employer to say that, yes, this person's employed? Because sometimes, typically, you'll bring a hydro bill or something in to prove your residency, which is not always going to be possible for somebody who is just working here for 3 or 4 months. So just a thought.
If this is moved forward, we could definitely look at multiple levels of verification. So not just relying on, a residential tenancy agreement, for example, to show that you're actually living here. It could be a letter from an employer, or we could have multiple ways of verification.
Councillor Hoare?
I agree. We need to think about the seasonal workforce for sure. I don't know whether I agree with all the way up to 10, personally. I think we would get greater buy-in at the 5 rate, but I do think that the idea of, so you could have a day rate, but you could also have a weekly rate. And I think, if the weekly rate is, a deal, so, maybe it's $25 for a week or whatever instead of 35 if we were doing it at $5 a day, then you might get just that little bit more buy-in. Just a thought. I would like to know what our actual costs would be before I agree that the residents of the West Coast, if you live this side of Sutton Pass, I don't really want you paying full hit. But if it turns out that the operational costs are quite high and we need to make sure that those are covered, then a nominal fee maybe, I would not be averse to. Do we have any idea what the cost would be from like a third-party company to do this sort of thing? If we don't factor in enforcement, if we're just factoring in the kiosks and that maintenance and the program, do we have any idea?
Without actually going out to the purveyors of parking programs, we're just not sure at this point in time. We would need to reach out and get some more details, and all of that would come back to council before anything is actually solidified, obviously. If I had to ballpark it, probably around $200,000 full in. There is an initial upfront expenditure for the first year because it's the digital kiosks and the placement. So it's very variable of how many kiosks do we need to make sure that it's convenient for visitors to find them so that they don't all have to guess at where they need to go for these. Is there connectivity for those kiosks? Setting up the application process, how complex is the verification program for residents, visitors or non-visitors, or residents, seasonal workers, etc. So there's a lot of variables in there. So I'd imagine that the first year to set it up would be higher. Mm-hmm. Then once you get into the operational component of it, then it would become more stable. Right, because then it's a fee for service of implementation. You're paying for the software and the lease of the kiosks, for example. And then depending on the enforcement level, if you're using external forces or internal, how much or how little you're doing. So, and that would be very variable. So if this is something that committee of whole that would like to pursue, then what we would do is start engaging those various groups and then bring that report back to council so that you can consider the cost benefits to make sure that this is something that is of value to the community and would be worth implementing, because you don't want to end up with a program that costs you 90% of the cost of implementation, right? It's just not worth it then. So it'd have to be a significant benefit to the community for revenue generation and not just all going to a parking purveyor.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering about the ballpark, but
yeah, it's very hard for me to guess at this point.
I totally respect that without going to RFP. I do like the community-wide because you don't end up pushing people out onto streets or further out or whatever. If everything is included, I think that's a good idea. And it's amazing how many visitors are surprised. I mean, I was just in the city, and let me tell you, there was pay parking everywhere. Yeah.
Mr. Lawrence, have you been to a community that has had a software program like that? Or a kiosk or...
Many.
Oh, you have? Okay. I haven't, so just...
Well, Vancouver, drive in Vancouver, they have it. Tofino, obviously, they have their parking program, so you can do it online or you can use their meters. Every airport, the parking at the BC ferries, same idea. So they're very common, City of Victoria. So all the large urban centers generally have them that have parking congestion. Like I said, we don't have a congestion issue. We don't need to move people along. But we are feeling the pinch with respect to how do we pay for the increased demands on our infrastructure and how do we fund that?
Any other questions from council?
I just wanted to clarify the number after all the breakdown. You said $200,000 would be your estimate. It seems like a lot of work and ill will, if you will, for $200,000. It seems that the amount of staff time potentially, and that I just wonder if it's really worth going down that, because we have other things to work on. Value for time invested.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it at 200,000. My initial dreams were in the millions, but and I had buy-in, but I'm curious if it's worth pursuing at all.
So, and I completely understand where Councillor Kennington you're coming from, and I agree wholeheartedly. The numbers before, and when I'm talking about that, the estimate that I provided council, that sort of that $460,000 with a $200,000 cost, is the absolute most pessimistic number I could possibly come up with. When I first did this, I was being optimistic, and I used like $10 a day, forecasted it out on the, Parks Canada shows that there's 1.1 million vehicles coming through on an annual basis, and I was going, wow, we're set. There's millions of dollars that we could bring in. But it would be misleading council to say, hey, this is the most optimistic number that I can come up with. And if I was doing that, I would agree that, yeah, it could be theoretically $1.5 million or more dollars that could come in at the cost of $200,000. We just don't know. So the absolute starting point that I wanted to go with council is saying, look, this is the bare bones, right? This is worst case scenario. You could count on probably somewhere around of $250,000 that would go into municipal coffers for offsetting infrastructure costs or upgrading wherever council needed to use it. So that's about as pessimistic as I can be. So I think those numbers should be viewed in that light. If looking at the numbers, so it was $460 or $460,000 based off of a $5. Right? If you go to 10, double that, right? But the cost of doing the program doesn't go up double, right? There would be a larger allocation to the proponent that is running the background, because it's usually a percentage. But it wouldn't be proportional to that. That first one is infrastructure plus administration, and that administration would be proportional for the revenue coming in based on a small percentage. So where that would land, we don't have to go to $10. We could do $7. So that would add another 200,000 potential dollars to that number. So we're up at 600,000 rather than 400,000. So there's a lot of variability in there. So I just wanted to make sure that I was being as pessimistic as possible.
I totally appreciate that as a very pessimistic person myself. Thank you.
On the pessimistic front, maybe. So 460, say it does cost 200 grand. So that $260,000 is the equivalent to how many percentage points of taxes,
1% per 35,000
right?
is the rough number, so it's a 6%.
Yeah.
But that's of the municipal side of the tax. That's not
Mhm.
like what people see as their tax rate. It's-
No,
it's
and
a
I
portion of it.
get that. I'm just like, bearing that in mind, that's the one other place we get, undesignated money, right?
How many taxpayers do we have? Divide that by, or divide 260,000 by.
How much math do we want to
1,700
do
people.
on this?
About about $150 per resident,
Right.
I would see. So,
All right, let's move to Councillor Mafty.
Well, I'm glad we're all pessimistic here, because then I won't feel out of place. This issue came before us as an idea, and I expressed my opinion then, and just in the spirit of keeping debate open and robust, I'd go on the record to say that I'm fairly strongly against this. I've just made a couple notes here, and some of the information I'm looking at is drawn from the report that we were just presented. One of the things that jumped out at me here is a statement that demand on our infrastructure is compounded by expanding visitor presence that triples demand levels during peak tourist season. Ucluelet can see demands on our infrastructure that are equivalent to over 6,000 permanent residents. That's galling, and it's not galling, but it's shocking. And one of the questions that immediately comes to my mind is maybe the issue here is that we're dealing with overvisitation, in which case we should stop attracting visitors, and instead of looking at how we can profit in some small way off of them, we should realize that there's no way that whatever they're paying for parking is going to make up for the actual value, knowing what the worth of that infrastructure is versus even the most optimistic revenue we can generate from this program. So to my mind, it comes down to a philosophical question, whether we want to welcome people to our community or whether we want to exploit the people that come to our community. And quite frankly, to me, a pay parking program like this, to be blunt, I feel like it's a cash grab. It's opportunistic, and it's commodifying our community as a destination. I'm really glad that our community has been able to transition from a resource-based economy to a tourist-based economy. I think that's something we should all be proud of, but I don't think that we should now start figuring out how we can squeeze more money from the people that are coming here to support our community. That's my own personal opinion. I'm pretty strongly against it, but this is a committee of the whole, and it's never far from my mind that as councillors, we're here to represent the community. So one of the first things that I'd like to see before we take any steps forward or further is to put this out to the community, and I'm not sure what the best or most efficient mechanism to do that is, but I'd like to get input, because as a councillor, if I hear that 60-70% of the community supports the idea, it doesn't matter what my own personal feelings are. If I hear that a majority of the community doesn't support this, again, it doesn't matter that I'm in agreement with them or not. So I commend I commend staff and Mr. Lawrence on a really thorough report. I know a lot of work went into it. It's really nice to be able to look at the numbers, and I agree that there are some very logical, rational reasons behind a program like this. So I don't think it's crazy. It just doesn't appeal to my sense of what I think Ucluelet should be or what I want it to be. But again, I'm one Ucluetan, and I'd like to hear from the other 1,800 before before I feel like I can make a recommendation on their behalf.
Any response to that, Mr. Lawrence?
I'm not sure if there was a a question there. We can do as much or as
rebuttal.
little engagement as council desires. There is always the option for council to direct staff to do outreach to the community with respect to any new potential program, service existing or otherwise. In instances such as this, when we're talking about revenue generations, the pessimist in me says that most people are, you don't want to see another program that that taxes anybody. So it might be, you never know what the response is going to be, but it could be valuable information to council. There are significant number of communities that do programs that do similar programs. I know I don't want to compare ourselves to other communities. Whistler, for example, has a detailed parking program. They're $25 a day. That's part of visiting their community, and that's how they offset some of the costs associated with their what they have to do to accommodate all those visitors, to allow them to experience their community. I guess one comment that I would put out there is that the visitors that we have coming today, that number that Councillor Mafty pointed out, that our population swells to over 6,000 during the summer, unless we reduce the number of accommodation providers in town, that's not going anywhere. So that demand on our infrastructure is already in existence, and is not going anywhere unless we are able to reduce the number of beds in our community and restrict visitation somehow, which I know, it's a resort community. That's not really the intent, as I understand it. But future growth in the community for visitors is something definitely that council has control over. But the existence of the already available spaces would be very difficult to undo. So we're going to have that demand on our infrastructure. It's not going to go away. A lot of the infrastructure was envisioned, as you'll hear later in the agenda. We're dealing with infrastructure and systems that were envisioned back in the 70s for a community of 2,000, not community of 2,000 plus visitors. So we're already dealing with those challenges, and they're just not going to go anywhere.
I appreciate that, and I guess for me the final comment that I'd make is I agree that those are challenges. I don't see how charging visitors for parking is really going to meaningfully address those. I think the income that could be generated isn't in line with the impact that the visitors are making. And I know that there are positive impacts that they make contributing to the economy, but as far as the negative impacts on our infrastructure, I struggle to see how $500,000 or $1 million coming in is going to offset the issues that we've got. And so anyway, at the end of the day, I'd really like to hear from the community.
Yeah. I think my only other comment would be this isn't a magic bullet. It's not intended to be a magic bullet that will solve all of our problems. It is, when we're talking about infrastructure and infrastructure deficits that every community is struggling with, we're not unique in that situation. We have increased demands because of visitors, but also of growth. So there we have compounding challenges with our aging infrastructure. This is one level. Right, and the more layers of revenue that you can throw at the problem, the easier it is. So it's a combination of existing property taxes, it's management, it's operations, it is grants, it's possibly parking revenues, it is every opportunity that we can think of to help offset and address some of that infrastructure costs that are coming to council and to the community. Even today we have a report with respect to sanitary, and it's we can't. We need to figure out ways to fund that. So if it's not this, then we need to look at somewhere else.
I guess I'm gonna argue with myself here. When I previously talked about the $200,000 not going anywhere, it dawned on me that utilizing a small amount of money to have a shovel-ready project can sometimes lead to millions in funding. So I'm going to walk back my previous statement.
That's great, Councillor Kennington. I think the numbers here are extremely low compared to what they could be, and of course the as Mr. Lawrence said, the major expenses would happen in the first year, and then it might be just a roller coaster of income for us that we can use toward that infrastructure that is fading fast. Councillor Anderson, anything from you?
Sure. I'll jump in here. Right? Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up on a farm, and I hated the idea of paying for parking. But I think it's one of those things. It's kind of become a necessary evil in some ways. But the way I agree with Councillor Mafti that it's never a fun thing to have to add. But at the same time, I think if there is going to be wear and tear in the community that increases because of visitation, and this sort of goes to Councillor Hoare's point, if there is tourism that's coming to our town, there's going to be a contingent of people here that really don't see anything from that. And they have to deal with the traffic. They have to deal with, whatever the increase in the number of people that load up, especially in August. And it would be nice, because we have these inevitable problems with infrastructure that are coming down. So that pill's a little easier to swallow, I find, in the sense that if we can lower taxes in any way, or something that's coming down the pipe, no pun intended, if we have problems with infrastructure and we have to put those on the backs of the taxpayer, if there's anything that can reduce that, and in this case, I see tourists coming to town and helping the local that maybe doesn't see anything from tourism, then to me that makes sense. And so, and just reading the whole package that was put together, I think as it is, it makes sense to me because it's not overly egregious. Well, definitely not because locals are exempt, but having the community-wide program and I guess other West Coast residents, I agree with what you're saying there, and having a flat rate. My only worry, and this would be a question for Mr. Lawrence, is, and I guess we'd have to see how this plays out, and you did address it, was private parking lots like the co-op or even the high school or things like that, or Davison Plaza, for example. Do you think we would see problems there? And I'm wondering if you've had any feedback from any other municipalities that have had that situation where people are starting to park in private lots to avoid paying for the community-wide program.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Staff haven't reached out to other communities at this point with how they deal with that challenge. We do know, and from years of comments from businesses such as Davidson Plaza and the co-op, that challenge is already there, right? People coming in, parking their RVs and staying there all day long, and they just drop off their vehicles. So that would definitely be something that we would need to work with the businesses on. We do have challenges there because we can't provide direct aid to any one organization, right? So their private lands are their responsibility, and we can't step onto those. So there's opportunities there for signage, a community-wide program. Is when I'm thinking about it, I would hope that it would have less of that occurring, because it's not you have to pay for parking just on this downtown street or in this municipal lot. It's the entire community is one blanket parking area. So my expectation would be that people wouldn't make the connection immediately with, I can park in a private parking area and not have to pay a parking fee. Now, I do know from personal experience, just going out to Tofino on an overnight kayaking trip, I had to find parking for overnight parking, and some of the businesses have added in opportunities for people to park there overnight, and they charge a ridiculous amount for the privilege of parking on private land. So there might be, for those businesses and landowners that have appropriate zoning and allowances for parking, to actually create opportunities there for people to park as well. But it would be something that we'd want to work with the business owners on and come up with at least a strategy for communication. But enforcement on private land would be very difficult for us.
All right, thank you for that. Sorry, I got my little guy here. Is making me get out of here. Okay.
That's okay, Councillor Anderson. Did you want to say something, Councillor Hoare?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, if we had community buy-in to the community-wide thing, could it be that you know, if you parked at the co-op, you still needed to have your pass? But I know that would have, you know, officially that would be private land on a private thing, but I don't know.
So
I don't know how
private
that would work.
landowners could definitely charge parking for the opportunity to park in their parking lots. So yeah, absolutely, they could do that. There might be some opportunity if we were doing proactive enforcement, then we could even have an agreement to do that, and there would be maybe a nominal fee, as long as it was open to everybody and not just one business, because we have to ensure that we're not giving a benefit to one business over another business, is where the balance lies. There are opportunities there that we could explore. I'd be out of line with guessing at what those might be and committing to council that there is a way to do it. But private landowners, they have the right to manage their lands as much as they want. When you're looking at, say, Davidson Plaza, when you have multiple businesses in there, they may or may not want to go down that path because it could lessen the number of traffic in their lots, right? So that would be a discussion for those property owners and the municipality have to see if there is opportunity there. There's always the ability for us to provide signage for all private parking lots and saying, here's a sign, you know, put it up in your lot saying you have to have your pass for the municipality. But the property owners would have to do that enforcement, right? Unless they asked us to do it for them and there was some sort of an agreement. That's kind of just off the top of my head for something like that. But there's always where there's a will, there's a way.
I just feel like there might be a workaround there, and because it would seem to me that, like, I'm like the parking spots at the Grey Whale and the ones at Davison and the one, I mean, I can vouch for how many people park their car and I watch them walk across the Blue Room for breakfast, and I don't see them come back until, like, 3:00 in the afternoon. They've gone to breakfast, and then they went for coffee, and then they went down to the aquarium, and then they finally came back up and did their shopping. So they were a customer.
I think one of the comments that I have is, and the reason that my instinct is to go away from an hourly rate or a zone rate, is that type of behavior would just be, it would explode, right? As soon as you make free areas and non-free areas, then the best of us will go for the free spot every single time. So by making it a blanket area, we're trying to mitigate some of that, saying it doesn't matter where you park. Buy your day pass and you're good to go. And will there be impacts? Probably, right? To what extent those are, and what level they are, and if we need to do more education awareness programs attached to it to help mitigate some of that, that might be something that we need to explore if this program does move forward.
Mr. Lawrence, how would that work at the Inner Boat Basin? Is that considered our property or DFO's property?
We need to investigate that a little bit more, but we lease the area from DFO, so that's it's under the harbor agreement. It's we manage it, and then we would have to figure out how this would work. What at the bare minimum, right? We would still say, park in Ucluelet. Ucluelet is the entirety of Ucluelet is a parking fair zone, and we wouldn't advertise saying, "Hey, this area here is exempt because it's on DFO or federal property." We wouldn't advertise that. We might just need to figure out if we're allowed to do enforcement on that property. And that's what we would have to look at, if we'd have to actively be legally allowed to enforce.
Interesting.
Tagging onto your harbor thought. So, thinking about your overnight kayaking. So, if you have a day pass, like, is it a 24-hour pass? Is it a, it's only good for today, October 23rd until midnight. But if I'm doing an overnight, do I need to buy two? Do we have an overnight pass? Is this one of this is where, my whole idea of a weekly, I don't know whether there's such a thing as a monthly, for some of the people like the commercial fishers that come out and work for
Right.
a block of time and then go or something.
So the opportunities for variety of passes is left to the imagination. You can make it as complicated or as simple as you desire. So the simplest one is you buy it for the day, right? So, and you look at that as a calendar. So if you're here on, October 23rd, you buy a pass. If you hit into October 24th, you need a new pass, 25th, a new pass. If you're doing time orientated, then it's like if noon to one day to noon on the other day gets more complicated, right? The technology for scanning license plates and determining what that is, the technology is there. Right, so you can literally the parking systems now are so advanced that somebody will drive along, it'll register the license plate, and it will tell you if they're legal or they're not legal, right? Or if they're local or non-local. Did they buy a pass? Did they not buy a pass? And then you just stop and issue the warning ticket. Hopefully, is what we would recommend at this point. Whatever council would like to see, we could do, and then we would work with a purveyor of parking programs, like a third party, to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what's easy to manage, and then bring that back for consideration.
Thank you.
I have
Councillor
another
Kennington?
one. For businesses who have or are planning on paying cash in lieu of parking, how does that really work in that case? Because when somebody pays cash in lieu of parking, it goes out that parking spot is in the core or somewhere, but now suddenly the parking spot that they've paid for, somebody else has to pay again to park there, right? Or is it really an reserved spot, or is it just saying you're just waiving the parking requirement? It's going to cost you $35,000 or whatever it costs to do a parking in lieu.
So I think I think we're talking about there are two different entities really. So the parking, a cash in lieu of a parking stall, is a mechanism to allow a property owner to not build parking because their visitors, their resident, their whatever that's using their space needs to use other parking stalls. So whenever a business or a landowner resident builds something and they can't do their parking spots, and council approves that $8,000 per parking stall, that money goes into constructing parking spaces in other areas. So that person that comes in and needs to park somewhere, it's not a designated spot, right? So we have a development downtown, I've forgotten the address and the name, but they're looking at parking in lieu. their visitors or resident would be parking anywhere in the downtown core, right? They could park wherever they wish. So it's not a specific site. This is just you're not adding to the parking program, therefore you pay for it instead of building it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand that in principle, but what I'm referring to is say if we're talking about the one across from the old or the Break Bakery that has residents in it, and they did cash in lieu. So their visitors or resident will be parking on the street, and I can't remember specifically, but if there is, like, let's say, a nightly rental in that area that has that arrangement, then their guest. So that goes to how long is that parking good for? Because obviously they would need to park there overnight.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. So the cash in lieu is with respect to they're not building a parking stall on their property. So therefore that person, that visitor is parking on public lands, right? And that is a mechanism to give the municipality compensation for not building on their own property, which would be a private stall. So if they wanted to, they do a private stall, then that $8,000 wouldn't come into play. I think it's $8,000. So they're not really paying for the privilege of having a dedicated spot for that building. They're compensating the public and the community for not having their own parking is the way that it looks. So yes, a visitor would still have to pay their parking pass, right? And then they would have to pay, if they're staying overnight, if it's just on a calendar day basis, they would have to pay, if it's $5, they'd have to pay $10 to stay a night, or vice versa, whatever it would be. So I don't think there's a mechanism to offset that for that one landowner who wasn't able to build parking on their own lands.
Thanks.
And Mr. Lawrence, what kind of public engagement could be done to Councillor Mafty's point of asking the public's opinion? What sort of engagement could happen?
That would be up to council. We could do as simple as a survey. Online survey. We could do open houses. We can do a community forum. The level and quantity of engagement is as much as council deems necessary to get the information that you need to ensure that you're making an informed decision on any given topic. So we could do a very, very simple engagement process where we send out information on what we're up to, the high level view of the program, and then have a link to an online survey that's open for a couple of months so that people can say, are you generally in favor or not? Is this a great idea or is it a terrible idea? Provide comments, and then we could bring a report back. We could do a full open house. We could, do a community forum. So whatever council would like to see.
I think the survey would probably suffice. Would that be okay with you, Councillor Mafty?
Yeah. I mean, I from experience, I don't think we're ever going to get 100% turnout, but if we get a representative sample that we can extrapolate from, I'd be satisfied. And for me, satisfied means confident that I have a decent idea of what people want. So even if we got 100 people to get back to us with a yes or no, I think that would be pretty good. Hopefully we'd get more. If we had 5 replies, I'd say, well, maybe we need to try harder, but.
So what sort of direction would you like from us?
Pardon me for 1 second where I log back in.
A survey is like the easiest cheapest, most efficient way to do it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do that.
If we're talking about like open houses or forums and stuff like that, that's a significant amount of staff time to go in and engage with the public, get the word out and that. So the most the simplest way to do it, not necessarily the most effective, is to send out an information package, make it available, and then we could do through the Yuki mail and social media, send it out there. It's like, we would like your feedback. Here's what we're thinking. And the most effective is I think the simplest one question.
Yeah.
In general terms, are you supportive of a parking program that for visitors coming to our community? Yes or no, something like that. It's not going to give council an in-depth view of the variety of thoughts that people are having with it. We could even do a spectrum might be something that we could consider, is like how much are, it's like, do you hate this idea or love this idea, and do a spectrum possibly. We'd have to give it to consideration as to what would give council the best take on it. A yes, no might not be ideal, because the initial response is, no, I hate parking programs. I don't want to pay for parking. Forget it. Without reading the material, right? So whatever we get will have to be considered with that caveat in mind, is we don't know how well people have understood the material if we're just doing a survey with somebody that's just reading information online. So there's a little bit of balance there, but it could give council a little bit of an idea of what the community's thoughts are.
Agreed.
And I'm not sure if all of council agrees with me that the all West Coast residents should have a park pass and not have to pay. So that includes Tofino and Ucluelethat, Toquat, and Area C.
I think what we could do, if it sounds like this is starting to move forward, that there's general support from council, need more information, of course, and no set decision at this point in time. But with that, what we can do is part of the process that we would put out there, we'll do the survey first, and then we'll come back with council with that information, and then probably go out to proponents and say, okay, give us your best bet. What are we looking at? And then come back with that information. Now, at that time, we would be able to provide council with, here's how much to administer the free passes for Ucluelet residents and West Coast residents. So if it's, say, $2 administrative fee per vehicle in Ucluelet or on the West Coast, then we could present that saying, hey, there's another 2,000 vehicles out there, so it'd be $4,000, right? Or if it's, $50 per vehicle to administer, and there's 2,000, that's a different discussion for council. So depending on how much that's going to cost to administer. So we would be able to present that back to council.
I'm just thinking of the survey, how you would how you would say that, like, would you just put it out to Ucluelet residents saying only Ucluelet residents don't have to pay, or would you include the other communities on the West Coast? Because that may alter the residents' opinions on this program, right?
I agree.
That's a great question. I'd have to consider that. We'd have to figure out how. Asking survey questions is an art form to make sure that you get the information that you want. So I think staff would need to have discussions internally on what is the best question to ask, or do we need multiple questions? Because it might be the case that one question isn't going to cut it. So what we would do is, for direction from the committee of the whole here, would be we would look at a survey to issue to the West Coast, right? My initial thought would be we'd be asking, are you a Ucluelet resident? Are you a non-resident? And then what type, are you in favor of a parking program, yes or no, right? So that we can have a gauge of, well, non-residents don't want it because they think that they're going to have to pay. Residents are supportive of it. I have to detail that out and then craft the questions from there. So
It would be
hedge a bit.
would be tricky, yes, because I know when Tofino rolled out their pay parking, I was a little annoyed that Ucluelet was not included in the free passes. It's just Tofino residents, and I don't want to give that sense back to them that they need to pay.
Mhm.
And maybe that'll convince them that we don't need to pay.
My gut feeling on this, sort of through the mayor, would be, our friends at the ACRD that come into town to bring their kids in and they shop for groceries, and that would be really tough. They're taking their kids to swimming lessons and things like that. Then it would be tough for like the folks who live just outside of the boundaries of town or at Atatsu. But I'm all for charging Tofino double. I'm just kidding.
And you're on record with that.
Sorry, Tofino, I don't mean it.
That was my thought on the just knowing what the ballpark administration would be per one, because I would love to not charge them too, but I'm just thinking if that's a really big hit monetarily, then maybe you do pay a $10 fee for a yearly or whatever.
Well, that's why I suggested at the beginning, charge 10 instead of 5 for the visitors and not charge the West Coast residents.
We could definitely do something like that in a program. Where I think, we need to target the survey to local residents, right? Because we want to hear from Ucluelet residents how they feel about this. This is the residents' community, and no disrespect to our surrounding communities that come and enjoy this space as well. But this affects us and our taxpayers directly. And although it's like somebody from Tofino that's coming to enjoy the community regularly would be impacted on this. This is a decision for residents primarily. It's not that we don't want to hear from them, but I think that's a key thing. So we'd have to craft it in a way that ensures council is hearing what local residents in Ucluelet are thinking, but also if there's others that have a voice out there as well, that you have an opportunity to hear that as well. So we'll work on some sort of a survey that to try to get that information for council. With respect to a resolution, Mr. Rotenberg and I are just working on one for you. There's one at the very bottom of the committee of the whole report. And if council will bear with us for just a second, we'll finish off updating that resolution for council's consideration.
Great, thank you. Actually, that resolution sounds quite good as it is.
We're just changing the middle part there, so it says implementation of a visitor parking program, and then semicolon, undertake a community survey is what I changed it to,
Okay, great.
and bring a follow-up report back to council providing an overview. So I can read out what we have right now is that the committee of the whole recommend council direct staff to issue a request for proposals for the implementation of a visitor parking program, undertake a community survey, and bring a follow-up report back to council providing an overview of the parking program, inclusive of cost, impacts, and revenue generation for consideration. Now, the RFP, if council wants to move that forward at the same time, that RFP is non-binding. If you don't want to go into it, then you just say stop. If the survey says, no, this is a terrible idea, we don't have to follow through with signing any agreement, but the RFP will be able to provide us with the details of how much this is going to cost, because the people that are going to come and bid on something like this aren't going to do all that work for free without the chance of actually undertaking a program. If we don't do it, it'll only be very, very high level information that we're going to get, and it might not be accurate enough for council to make that final decision as to move forward or not.
Yes, I think that is important information. I can go ahead and read that just as you read it if you want me to.
I think Mr. Rotenberg has it just about ready here. Or if the mayor wants to read
I
it
can
out, you
just
can,
read it.
by all means, yeah.
Because I wrote down the changes that you said. I will move that the Committee of the Whole recommend Council direct staff to issue a request for proposals for the implementation of a visitor parking program, undertake a community survey, and bring a follow-up report back to Council providing an overview of the parking program, inclusive of costs, impacts, and revenue generation for consideration.
I'll second that.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries.
All right, so now you're in the committee.
Now we have
The next question for the committee to determine is whether you'd like, as council, to consider this matter now. So the question here is, would you like to rise and report and therefore deal with your own recommendation to yourself now, or if you'd like to rise without reporting? In this case, we'd recommend rising and reporting. That way the matter's fresh in your mind, and this motion would then be before you for you to consider. So it would be the same motion, except it would be that council directs staff to issue a request. So you're just going to cut those, what is it, the third, fourth, fifth,
Committee of the
sixth.
Whole, yes. So this is kind of like patting ourselves on the back.
Yeah, it's a tremendous pat on the back. But first motion in the committee would be, would you like to rise and report at this point in time?
May I have a motion that the Committee of the Whole rise and report?
So moved.
Councillor Hoare,
I'll second.
Councillor Mafty. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. And now,
So now you're considering your own recommendation. What would council like to do?
I will move that Council that Council direct staff to issue a request for proposals for the implementation of a visitor parking program, undertake a community survey, and bring a follow-up report back to Council providing an overview of the parking program, inclusive of costs, impacts, and revenue generation for consideration.
I'll second that again.
Councillor Hoare, any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. Thank you, Mr. Rotenberg. So we are now back as council. 7.1 was removed from our agenda, so our first report is 7.2, Development Permit for 2094 Peninsula Road. This item will be presented by the Director of Community Planning, Mr. Gregg.
Okay. And Mr. Rotenberg, could I share my screen, please?
Couple steps here.
Okay. I will join as a panelist. There should be a tune playing with the little spinning wheel. So this, while we're waiting, this is a development permit for 2094 Peninsula Road for a healthcare services building. And I can now share my screen. Except the host has disabled participant screen sharing. It's telling me. I'll try that again.
Mr. Lawrence, has Island Health made this announcement yet?
Not to our knowledge. We have advised them that this was before council, but no, they haven't done the official announcement yet.
So, through the mayor, this is a development permit for a two-story proposed roughly 1,000 square meter, 10,000 square foot primary care network clinic located really on Peninsula Road, just in the entrance of town, just before Forbes Road. It would contain a medical clinic, a laboratory, mental health offices, counseling offices, and other healthcare service space. The building is designed to be fully accessible with an elevator located in the central or common ground floor area access point. It's really using the front or half of the property located where there would be an access both for vehicles and pedestrians in a parking lot off of Peninsula Road, and then the new building would be behind it. And I would just note, so on page 145, 146 of your report, there's a draft development permit. This is a form and character development permit for the building that's being proposed and the landscaping. That draft DP refers to development plans in Schedule 1, which is Appendix A to the report. And we usually have that reference in there so we're not duplicating architectural plans, both in the draft permit and in the report. And we did such a good job of not duplicating the plans that they're actually not in your agenda in front of you, I noticed. So I'm going to just briefly go through them, but also the applicant and their architect is going to actually go into the details. So if I'm skimming through, it's really, I just want to make sure that council sees what would be attached to the actual permit that is being issued. So the site plan, the building's located, it is a slope site. And the one I'd say, as it notes in the report, generally the building conforms with the DP guidelines, and we're recommending that council issue the permit in a nutshell. The one thing that, ideally you'd have your building facing the street, and the parking wouldn't be the thing that's closest to the street. However, it is a sloped site, and that is, I can appreciate, is a bit of a challenge. So they have, really responded with some landscape enhancements and protecting some of the trees in the frontage. So the building is as I said, it's two-story, sort of built into the slope somewhat. A very contemporary building. And again, forgive me for skimming through, but these are the architectural plans that are part of the permit. They included a number of, obviously site investigation steps, including, some photographs and looking at the grades. This includes looking at the materials they're proposing, as the architects seem to be playing with the sort of rough and refined materials of wood, how a tree, sort of has rougher on the bark on the outside, but can be very, very refined and on the inside. So that's some of the materials they've translated into the finishes of the building. And they provided a three-dimensional model. Again, there you can see how this sloped site is a bit of a challenge. So they're kind of building into the slope. The cross section at the bottom part of the page there shows how the lower floor kind of sinks into the slope to have a level entrance that is accessible. They provided some three-dimensional models as well. Again, a mix of materials, but very contemporary building. That again, you've seen the site plan, and yes, there are floor plans. Again, that really is about where all the offices and rooms within the medical clinic, which is, and it's just a bit of a lag there. The floor plans are really not affecting the form and character so much, but this is showing that the elevations show, detailing the materials, the signage, that all of that would be encompassed within the DP, the permit. Again, I don't want to steal the thunder of the architect, who's going to explain in more detail their thinking, I think, and what they're proposing. And the applicant, Mr. Moss, is here as well to address council if there are any questions. But I just wanted to make sure council's aware. We do have the whole package for actually attaching to the permit. And just see first, before I invite the applicant, I'd suggest if there are any questions for staff, I can certainly try and answer them.
So these slides you just showed us are not in our package.
I don't see them in the agenda. There were some excerpts that were in the report where some of the pieces, but the actual copy of they're the geotech report, some of the other reports are attached there. For whatever reason, the architectural plans are if you're looking for them in your package and wondering what does the building look like, here it is. So.
Got it. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gregg? Councillor Mafty?
Through the mayor, it's a quick question, no doubt reflecting my naivete, but someone raised the same question with me, so I'm going to ask it for both of our benefit. I wasn't on council at the time that the building that's currently going up at the end of Rainforest Drive was approved, but I was in the audience, and it was my understanding that it was almost exactly the same scope and focus in building that it was going to be a mix of use, and it was going to have medical clinic space. Explain to me, if you will, how this isn't totally redundant. Is the building on Rainforest no longer going to serve that purpose?
Through the mayor, yes, that's our understanding, that the developer of that site needed to come to an arrangement with Island Health, and that there was an RFP, and we understand that this applicant is pursuing the construction of the building for that clinic. So there's some limitations on what the building that's under construction on Rainforest Drive can be used for, because it had uses that were built into the zoning that sort of dependent on there being a medical services office on the ground floor. And if not, well, then some of the uses had to change. So that is a separate building that we understand will be used for, the upper level was to be dwelling housing units, I think half a dozen townhouses essentially, but the lower part of the building would need to conform with the uses that are permitted under the zoning, or be coming in to look for a change in the zoning.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Gregg?
Sure, why not?
Councillor Kennington?
Love the building. Don't like the parking in front. I'm just curious as to, when we talk about form and character guidelines, we already have a problem as you come into town where it's a vast landscape of parking and concrete with buildings pushed to the back, and everybody agrees that that's less than ideal. And I'm just curious as to why they didn't park up in the back. I'm familiar with this property because I actually did a previous development permit for it for a cabin resort, so very familiar with the grades and whatnot. And I'm just curious. If it was totally necessary to put the parking in front, and what the impact of that will be on the entrance to town.
Through the mayor, I'd suggest excellent question maybe for the applicant of their thinking around the designer for the architect. I suspect some of it comes down to cost, that if you were having the access, having to go further into the site to have an upper parking lot and then sort of enter on the second floor, it would sort of flip the building around. Certainly anything like that is doable. The one thing, and I agree that having a parking lot on the street is never ideal. The one thing I would point out is that the zoning that is the zoning is different towards the entrance to town, and then they're working within the existing zoning compared to, like, say, the Village Square right in the center part of town, where the guidelines are much more associated with sort of the pedestrian storefront on the street. At the entrance to town, we have more sort of automobile-oriented commercial, where you have gas stations and a lumber yard and those sort of things, which those are a little different pattern. I would argue absolutely it's an excellent question of how does the entrance to town change and become better, not worse, over time. And so I think the details of how are you landscaping, how are you retaining trees, how are you managing the boulevard, so that what is greeted from the street, visually for someone who's making that first impression as they arrive in town isn't a parking lot. That is not putting our best foot forward. But I think there are some challenges with the site, and likely having to do with the logistics of getting the parking further up and the cost associated with it.
I get that. But the cost is a savings to the developer as opposed to the cost of the community as far as the character of our town. I'm all for the medical clinic. I mean, it's fantastic. I would love to see it, but doing as you entered into town, it's always been a sore spot where the first you're greeted by a pile of tires and you're greeted by just endless vast amounts of parking, and there's no intimacy. So when we talk about character, we have very few areas of influence where we can really decide how our town looks and feels, and I think we need to be looking at how can we make things better, as you say, as opposed to just saying, well, it's already ugly there, we'll just make it ugly further. And not to say that the building's absolutely beautiful. I love the building. I really wish it was forward. And then I wonder, it's a lot of underutilized land in the back, which would not be able to be used for any other use, such as housing, because there'd be no fire access to it. So as far as I'm concerned, there seems to be sort of a lack of efficiency with the site planning.
Through the mayor, again, great questions to put to the applicant and their architect, but at the same time, I think they're completely valid questions, and this is why do you have a development permit area designated around form and character, and we have one specifically for Peninsula Road because it does have a community value, and so satisfying council that those guidelines are being addressed adequately is what it's all about. So that's a valid concern, and so the development permit process can shape a development as well, given really to make sure that it meets the community's needs and expectations. So that's, I guess what I'm saying is good questions. Absolutely.
Any other questions for Mr. Gregg? Does the applicant want to come and speak? Okay. And just give us your name and address, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So my name is Darren Moss. I live at 2143 Aaron Way, Nanaimo. And so I'm here as the project manager on behalf of Vidco Holdings, who is the property owner and has the contract with Island Health to deliver a primary care health center on that site.
Maybe just speak into the microphone a little bit better.
Yeah, is that a little bit better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So thank you to Mayor and Councillors for making time today to hear what we have to present, and mostly we're here to answer any questions you may have, so it's nice to have kind of a prelude of questions to change my thoughts about. I was going to talk about the same topics that Mr. Gregg did cover around the use and the intent of that building, and I'm also joined this afternoon with Hector from Shepherd's Park Architects. He's on Zoom. So this site is a very challenging site, as Mr. Gregg alluded to, and the initial design process for the site considered everything I believe I heard today about the site, parking, and trying to address that in parallel with the request from planning that we be very accessible from the multi-use trail. And so when we were trying to maintain that accessible path of travel from the multi-use trail to the front door of the building, that really governed our main floor elevation relative to the public multi-use trail. And so we tried to play with that with parking lots in the front, in the back, on the sides, twisting the building. And unfortunately at the 15-16% grade, when we tried to put the parking lot up top, we ended up with about a 12-foot retaining wall on top of the parking lot to retain the site on the top. And it became quite a earth movement more than it is now. The benefit of the way it sits now is that we can use the building and the foundation of the building and bury the services along the back of the building. So it gives a very different presentation of the building to the site. The way we tried to remediate that front parking lot is we've left as many trees as we can with the grade change and maintaining that, and we've gone through a fairly extensive landscaping program to try to reinstate native landscaping along Peninsula Road, because we heard loud and clear from planning at the start and totally understand why you want to not just have a parking lot as you walk in, as you drive in, as you ride in. So ideally, I agree, building could be at the front of the site, parking lot at the back, you'd never see it. On this particular site, that really didn't work out to be an option for us. And if it's helpful, we can share with staff those iterations and they can sort of see some of the constraints we work through. If you don't mind, I'm going to pass it off to Hector for a second so he can go through the actual form and character of the building. I know he has a tighter time constraint than I do this evening, so I can come back and address questions afterwards about land ownership and what happened on that. So Hector, over to you.
Thanks.
Hi. My name is Victor. I live in Anaheim as well. I'm part of the team of Wishburne Architects. As Darren was saying, we actually went through several iterations of the building. And at the end of the day, this is the setup that we managed to make it work most cost efficient for the client and for Island Health. And I think one of the changes that we're going to do right now, we're showing a PMT in the driveway, and that's going to be removed. So that's going to offer more planting area, and that's going to be the screen, and that will allow us to screen more the parking lot. And I don't know if you have any other questions that I can answer. Please just let me know your questions.
Any questions for Hector?
Hector, do you want to walk through the building and show the design intent? Can you share your screen?
Yeah. Just 1 second. So as it was explained previously, that's the concept of the building. The exterior needs to be a bit rough, like the tree. And as soon as we start carving out the entrances to the building, which I think is quite important, considering that there's a lot of public coming to this building, so that's creating some sort of like big openings, so people know that they are going to this clinic, with all the forestry context of the area. Here in the 3D view, as again, it was explained how we have to carve into the pre-slope side, and right now in these images we're not showing the landscape, but basically we're like we can present the landscape drawings, but we're like trying to make this to get back to nature as much as possible, and try to, for example, the concrete walls, the retaining walls, they are going to be landscaped to reduce the height of those walls. These are more perspectives of the building. Something that we're trying to incorporate on the second floor is some landscape in those balconies, which I think is going to really help to make it different from other buildings in the area. I think it's a very interesting concept that we're trying to do, like very contemporary West Coast. I know that like in the center of Ucluelet, there's like more of this village feeling, but in this area, I think there's like an opportunity to explore other kind of more contemporary architecture. Floor plans are trying to be as efficient as possible. On the lower floor, we have the clinic, and in the upper floor, we have counseling space and office space for Island Health. These are some general sections that we're not gonna go into much detail. And again, we have like exterior elevations with the materials. The main material of the main facade is like a metal panel with wood, with these wood carvings that it really warms up the building and make it more like more West Coast. And yeah, that's it. I don't know if Darren, if you have any other comments.
Yeah, I think it's worth touching base. Just as the end user, Island Health had a very strong input on the design of the floor plans and the programming of the building, and has the final sign off on that. So as we were working through that process, we started this RFP process, and they wanted a single story 10,000 square foot building, which is a nice ask, but very difficult to find a site to accommodate. And that's where we ended up at the 2-story building. The uses in the building are kind of divided between medical and sort of more wholesome health, whether it be mental health or nutrition or counseling or other services. And we've divided the building up so that every one of those facilities has its own access point, understanding how Ucluelet and surrounding areas work. Not all of those are going to be used at the same time. We want to make sure that different access points are available to all those programmings, which means there's 4 different public accesses to this building rather than one public access, which really is why we tried so hard to keep that main floor accessible from the parking lot and that pedestrian trail. We did look at a 3-story option, trying to, again, move the building forward on the site. that proved to be a bit of a stretch for what Island Health's programming was willing to undertake with the accessibility. The other piece around the parking is, as we get into this site and we start to apply current geotechnical requirements on that site, when you get a slope that's over sort of a 1 in 20, 10% slope, you end up with a bunch of seismic forces that have to be retained during that seismic event. That's when we get to an unrestrained retaining wall at the top of that parking lot that's really quite difficult to build. And another reason why we ended up at the bottom. So it's not just straight cost effectiveness, it's also very difficult to build on that site as we force ourselves further back on that site. And we end up doing a lot of earth manipulation beyond what we're already doing, which we didn't really want to do. We wanted to leave the top half of that site forested and in its natural state. To the point about density on this site, I would agree. It'd be nice to be able to build a more dense site, but the access restrictions on this site do make it challenging to have a building of this size on that site that fronts Peninsula Road and have a road that goes up to access the back of the site. There may be potential in the future to look at different access points off the back through partnerships or that kind of programming to get some kind of accommodation back there, but right now that's not currently on the table. The other question I heard was about the RFP process. From my involvement, we got involved with Vidco Holdings when the RFP from Island Health actually came out, and we responded. Well, the Vidco Holdings responded with our input and the consultant team input. I don't know what other applications were reviewed, but they were the successful applicant, and they do currently have a lease signed with Island Health that is to provide the healthcare center on this site. So Island Health will announce what they want to announce, I assume, but they have signed the lease and it is moving forward. So super happy to take any questions and try to address any thoughts that council or mayor may have.
Any questions for Darren?
I've got one.
Councillor Hoare?
And I know that Island Health was dictating the building. I'm just curious whether there's any accommodation on the site, because I'm thinking about like visiting specialists who might access it, and if there isn't somewhere for them to stay, then that becomes an issue. We all know that housing is an issue and places to stay. So I just wondered if that had been included in the plan.
Through Mayor. Yes, it hasn't been dealt with on the accommodation side. What has been included is a fair amount of office space for visiting physicians. So currently, right now, physicians drop in, run away. The intention is to try to provide space so they can stay in the region longer and carry out their day there. So there is office space for them, but not actual residences.
Well, that's too bad. Any other questions? Councillor Mafty?
Yeah, through the mayor, I have one really quick question, one really quick comment. This point's already been made clear, but I just, for my own peace of mind, I just want to be explicitly clear that at this point, Island Health has confirmed their interest and intent to use this building as described. This isn't a case where it's like, oh, well, this meets their requirements, so we're hoping that we can get something done with them down the road. This is like a for sure thing.
So I'm the project manager. I'm not the owner. However, the owner has bought the property. It closes this Friday, and he has a signed lease with Island Health.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted that like crystal clear. And then my my second comment echoes some of Councillor Kennington's points and Councillor Hoare's points. I do understand the challenges. I think you've clearly explained what they are, dealing with the grade, etc. Having said that, I also feel that in a way, the issue of housing doctors, of housing people, that's something that's just going to have to get dealt with later on down the road in another way somewhere else, and there'll be other challenges with that too. And so I would be really curious to see what options there might be that would be worth exploring, even if they're suboptimal, even if they don't necessarily, if they're not acted upon. It would be great to see like what kind of creative solutions could make more use out of this site. I think it would be really quite something to kill two birds with one stone and create like a really self-contained medical ecosystem there, rather than saying, well, this is part of it and the other part we're going to have to deal with somehow, some way, because the housing is certainly a huge challenge. I mean, that's one of the things we're seeing right now. We can't attract, we can't retain people, and if there's a way to do it, it would be great, even if it is hard.
That was, I've been dealing with Island Health for 9 years now on a medical center project, and all the focus groups we had along the way always insisted that there be some sort of accommodation at the medical center for visiting physicians. So to see that it's not part of this is a bit disappointing.
So personally, I totally hear what you're saying, and there's a lot of logic to what you're saying. From my point of view, the request for proposals that came out from Island Health didn't ask for that, and so competing against that requirements that wasn't built in. I will take your feedback back to the owner of the property and challenge them to find creative options moving forward, but I believe it might be a different process. But there is, as you point out, land left available, so we can challenge them to brainstorm that.
That would be great if you could take that message back.
Presumably that might be in the interest of the property owner, of the landowner, to say, hey, look, if it's doable and we can afford to build it, there's obviously going to be a demand for it. So that this is just a way that I see that we can communicate through you to say, hey, this is something that we think would be really worth it. Whether it's worth it to them remains to be seen. But
Councillor Hoare?
This is just an odd thought, and this goes back to like one of my old longtime hats when I was a field biologist, and I was visiting down in Texas at doing some research, some field research, and they had space in their biology building. So they were offices, but they actually had, they could be like a bachelor suite, sort of like a little room. Like there wasn't a great kitchen space. I mean, don't get me wrong, but there was somewhere where I could, lay my head at night, and not far from the labs where I was working. And so I don't know whether, I hate to say, like a corner, like one of those offices is convertible, like it has a Murphy bed in it, or it has something, because I just, it's just a thought to take back, because I can see there are a lot of specialists that don't come out here anymore because there is nowhere for them to stay. And now we have to go away to get access some of that healthcare, and that is an issue. And I love that there's a building and there's lots of office space, but if the people have nowhere to lay their head at night, will they even come out for a weekend?
Yeah, no, that point makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, there is a telehealth room in this. It's not the same thing as seeing a specialist in person. It's a step in a direction. But again, I'm happy to take that back to the owner and talk about that. I think that option is something we can talk to staff about and check. I haven't checked the zoning to see whether that's allowed in this area or not. But the longer term, maybe there's a couple residences or apartments up top. I do believe that's a different project, but certainly I think we should challenge the owner to have them consider.
Anything from you, Councillor Anderson?
I think you hit all the main points there. So yeah, I would just, through the mayor, I would echo what you said. It is a bit disappointing that there isn't a residence there. I've spoken to some specialists from Vancouver Coastal Health that said that they would love to come out and do a rotation out there, but it is difficult to find accommodation, even if it's short term. But I mean, I like what I'm hearing, where you're saying that you're willing to go back and challenge the owners to potentially come up with a solution. And I think, our staff in town here may be able to work with them on something that works out, because there is a piece of land back there. And, but, in general, it is a beautiful building, and I'm glad to see this medical center going in there, because God knows calling for a doctor's appointment in town is like getting tickets on a radio show. It's I don't know if we're going to get through or not.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Seeing no other questions, thank you for being here and presenting to us.
My pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Great. There is one recommendation, if council would like to make that.
I've got it.
Councillor Hoare?
I will move that council, with regard to the proposed healthcare services building and associated site works at 2094 Peninsula Road, authorize the Director of Community Planning to execute and issue development permit 23-05.
Thank you. Second.
I'll second that.
Councillor Kennington seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor?
I did vote.
Okay, okay.
Started writing.
None opposed, so that carries. Thank you. Our last report is 7.3 Fire Hall Replacement. This item will be presented by the Fire Chief, Rick Geddes. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through the mayor. So in 2021, 2022, the district commissioned Liberty Construction to do an assessment on the current fire hall, and mainly to focus on the condition of the current fire hall, provide a general location assessment, investigate and review current and future needs of the district as we grow and move forward, and in order to have a safe emergency building, and also have a facility that's adequate as the community grows. So specifically, the information we were seeking from that report was information on a major renovation of the current facility, a tear down and rebuild of the current facility in the same site, and new construction at alternate site. So those were specific areas of conversations in the report. Some key notes of the report included at the bottom of page 1 of my report there: the existing fire hall is rapidly deteriorating and no longer capable of meeting the minimum service requirements for public safety, and that the community has an immediate need for an aerial apparatus. However, an aerial apparatus will not fit in our building. So, the study provided some conceptual drawings that were basically just size modeling to show that the size of a facility that would be required, most likely to serve the future needs of the community, not necessarily what the building would look like. So there was some modeling involved, and that is included in the study there. So the study also made note of various other concerns, as you can see on page 2. Numerous building code, life safety, occupancy, access, and egress issues. Building does not have an adequate diesel particulate exhaust ventilation system. Firefighter tuner gear should be stored in a separate room away from apparatus exhaust. The present layout does not allow for that. No clean room for self-contained breathing apparatus or air bottles. Safe place, clean place to work on them and to store them. The existing washroom does not serve as an adequate decontamination shower. I won't go through the entire list because you get the point, and this was presented at previous council as well. So the gist of it is that our fire hall is overdue, and we're sort of at a crossroad as we expand and the community expands, as to so sort of seeking direction from council, which way we want to go moving forward. Now, new facility or modernized facility would align with several objectives of the OCP. Part 3 states increase community capacity to respond to emergencies. Policy 3.3 of the OCP states provide emergency services facilities, equipment, and resources that are adequate and affordable for the size of the local and visitor populations. And Policy 3.4 states identify and prioritize any infrastructure gaps which could affect the ability to respond to emergencies. As we know, our current facility also is not seismically sound, so any mild to moderate seismic activity would most likely have significant damage to our current facility, which would, of course, limit our ability to respond, not only as a fire department, as our emergency operations center for the community. So this report was presented to the previous council near the end of their term, and there was some feedback and some comments, but no recommendations from that council. So this was identified in the recent council strategic priority session as actually the top item for my department to bring back to council report on the state of the fire hall and the fire hall feasibility report. As you know, we did apply for a grant to replace the fire hall. That was 2021, but I believe we found the results last year that we weren't successful. So no real rationale was given why. We'll continue to seek funding options, of course, as we move forward in replacing and modernizing our fire hall. As mentioned previously, our current hall is not large enough for an aerial apparatus. What Fire Underwriters says, Underwriters, of course, is the where insurance companies get their insurance rates from. It's from data collected through Fire Underwriters. So they make strong recommendations that directly affect the insurance rates that businesses and homeowners will pay. So Fire Underwriters says that response areas with 5 buildings that are 3 stories or more in height, or districts that have a basic fire flow greater than 3,300 gallons per minute, or any combination of these criteria, should have a ladder company, meaning an aerial apparatus of some sort. Within the district, we currently have at least 13 structures that fit into the category of 3 stories or more, or a required fire flow of 3,300 gallons per minute, with more buildings on the way, as we know. So then at the end there's pros and cons of requests today. But basically, so back up to the top, and the reason I'm here is as we move into budget season is I'm just recommendations right at the start there. The council considers allocating up to $100,000 to engage a consultant to provide detailed design drawings and a construction cost estimate for a new fire hall in the 5-year financial plan, 2024 to 2028. And the council considers including in the construction cost of a new fire hall in the 2024 to 2028 financial plan. That's it in a nutshell. I'd gladly take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the chief? Councillor Mafty?
Through the mayor, I have one quick question. I understand that you applied for a grant that was declined. I'm wondering, you said that there wasn't any feedback, so I guess you've already answered my question, but I'm wondering if a lack of design plans would have been a factor in that grant being declined. And the reason I'm asking that is because I'm wondering to what extent it might make sense to get a grant that'll cover the building and then start spending the money on the plans, because otherwise, you know, we're spending $100,000 on plans, but we're never going to get the building if we can't. You know what I mean? So my specific question is whether you know if a lack of current design plans was a factor in the grant being declined.
Through the mayor, I'm unaware of if that was the case, although I believe we satisfied all the requirements of the application as submitted.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And your feeling would be that to have these sort of shelf-ready plans would put you in a better position to get a grant?
Through the mayor, I believe so, yes. And that would also give us, being more prepared for grant opportunities, but just that would also show commitment to responders as well, and the community that we are moving forward, and you know, with the public safety and responder safety as a priority.
It is scary that that's our EOC, and it probably wouldn't withstand an emergency, an earthquake, or anything like that.
Through the mayor, as Mr. Lawrence can attest to, I lose sleep over that.
Any other questions for the chief?
Yeah, I saw in the
Oh,
Go ahead, Councillor Kennedy.
I saw in the report some alternate locations. So with the drawings that would be done, would those take those locations into consideration? And the reason I mention that is the current fire hall is somewhat prime real estate, and potentially we have some real estate that may be more cost effective to build on, and potentially flipping out that existing property into something else. I mean, I guess Tugwell Fields was mentioned, and that's all because of the tsunami level. Is that correct? So I'm just curious as to will the design focus primarily on the existing fire hall site, or sort of more of a generic design that would fit in both locations?
Through the mayor, it's, again, whatever council wishes. I'm open to suggestions. The report, as you know, did speak to locating a fire hall at Tugwell Field. There are some advantages to that. Number one, there's a lot of space up there. We could build, a hall that would could be added onto, but it could also suit the community's need for several years. But a big pitfall to that was the access, and especially as they develop the top end, being more and more residential up the top of Forbes Road and the windy road, and leading down to an uncontrolled intersection at Peninsula was concerns in the report. But certainly open to explore all options as far as location.
Councillor Mafty?
I have one more quick question. I know nothing about this, but I'm assuming that, people have sort of figured out what the optimum design for a fire hall is. And my guess is that, other fire chiefs in other municipalities that maybe have built something have given you a really good idea of what you want. I'm wondering if it's necessary to start from scratch, or if there would be the possibility or the opportunity of kind of starting with what's already been done somewhere else. Like, let's say another community has already built a fire hall. Could we get those plans for less than $100,000 and tweak them?
Through the mayor, we could certainly explore that. I'm not sure what that would look like or how we would do that, but I do happen to know the Regional District of Nanaimo is come up with a standardized plan for all their regional district area fire halls. Dashwood Fire Department is in the process of building one. Arrington is moving forward on one, as I believe. So there are models out there that perhaps could be easily adapted. As we were going through this study, as I was preparing for this study a couple of years ago, one of the models I found through my research was Bowen Island. Has built a very similar sized facility that would sort of suit our needs. So there certainly are models out there, absolutely.
Thank you.
And so would that come in at less than 100,000?
Through the mayor, I'm not sure. I would assume so. I just don't know the route. I would need some guidance on the route of obtaining plans from other jurisdictions.
Mr. Lawrence?
I might be able to rescue the chief a little bit. There would be proprietary rights with respect to any drawing. So the city of Nanaimo would have an agreement with the architect and designers for those drawings. So there is a possibility that we could piggyback off of that, but it would probably be a substantial cost. The other aspect of that is the site impacts the design of the building quite significantly for massing and access. So depending on the actual site that you're looking at, unless you have lots of land, then the design would have to be shifted accordingly depending on the building would have to be adjusted determinate on the site. Sorry, I have to get that in gear. So it's not quite as simple as this is a nice building, we can just buy those drawings and we're good to go. Anybody that's designing this will do this study of the site, the access points, Peninsula Road. If it's along Peninsula Road or the existing site, it would be like what's happening at Matterson and Peninsula. How does a fire engine access that site? And then access the building as well. So that could be, you could buy a plan and then have to redesign the entire plan to make it work for that site. So there could be substantial risk in that, but there are more, I'm trying to find the right word for it. In the designs, there's very economical ways you can do some buildings in that, and we could definitely explore all of those in the RFP process.
So, through the mayor, it sounds to me that if it's a site-specific design and we're going to allocate $100,000 to design a building for a site, we need to decide what site we're building for before we make that commitment. So I think there's a conversation that we should have prior to granting whatever this recommendation would say to find a site that makes sense. And one of the concerns, like $6 million or close to $6 million for a fire hall is a lot of money, and it's anywhere where we can save taxpayer dollars, if taxpayer dollars are to be used for it, is with the quality of finishing on the outside. If you put it next to the high school on the main strip of our street, it's going to have some pleasant cues to it, and we all know those are expensive. So we should be exploring the cheapest, most invisible site we have in town, so that we can build the most cost-effective fire hall that we can. And then we can put something else beautiful where the existing fire hall is, maybe some housing. Pay for the fire hall by selling it.
Through the mayor, agreed, mostly, but location, there are not a lot of locations suitable for a facility that would meet our needs in this town. That's something to consider, but absolutely, if council wants to nail down a piece of property, location, prior to moving forward with this, absolutely no problem with that.
Mr. Lawrence?
I think there's two things. So at the with this report, we're asking for consideration, just to approve for consideration within the financial plan. But what we can do is do a site assessment as well, and look at it in lockstep. So we could present council with considerations during the budget process of the $100,000 if approved to consider the design of the building. But in the interim, we can still do another site assessment. We can revisit the report that Liberty has undertaken, see if there is any other opportunity. As council knows, we have very, very little land of our own. There could be an opportunity for a land swap of some sort. One thing in consideration of that is that if you're, and this will be a challenge with the existing site as well, as the chief will know, is that you can't tear down the building and not store your fire department somewhere. So there would have to either be a temporary building to house the apparatus and the equipment and be able to still respond while the building is being constructed, or you'd have to adjust that site or place it so that one goes up and the other one comes down immediately afterwards. So there's definitely a lot of logistical challenges with that, but there's always the possibility of earmarking that site to be sold off to pay for another site that we would have to purchase. So that would add some cost, but there might be cost savings as well. It's hard to say.
Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, if I could jump in, through the mayor. I've seen, we've all been to the current fire hall, and we know that it's in desperate need of we need a new one. I mean, it's in rough shape. We all know that. There was a member of the public sent us an email, and he had mentioned something, just some food for thought, but the idea that if we did do something a little cheaper, something like the Rennet Center type building, and then potentially maybe a yard back behind the a piece of land that's back behind the public works yard or something like that, just as an idea. And that was, I think, Mr. Lawrence answered my main question is if we go ahead with both recommendations. The first one, I mean, personally, totally agree that it's in our best interest to have those detailed drawings ready to go, so that if something does come up as a granted, if we're going to be in a good position or a better position than we were before to have something that's ready to go. Totally agree with that. The second one, I was a little bit worried. I was a bit reticent to jump on that, just because if we slip in, and I think it says below 8 million, if we were to throw that into the budget for 2024 to 2028, I like the word "consider" in there was really important, because I would think that looking further down on the agenda in the HAF report, I did see a fire hall was tucked in there. Potentially $6 million for a fire hall was one of the things that was put in the application for the HAF. And there's a few other, I think, funding sources. And even when we're moving ahead with the idea of having public or paid visitor parking, then we can sort of have that discussion about having sort of a fancier a fire hall or something that's a little nicer. But if we did have to pay for it ourselves, and we were looking at something that was going to be, maybe we would sort of scale back. So Mr. Lawrence, you kind of answered that question. You said, we can look at alternatives if we do have to fund it entirely ourselves. But I guess my question for Chief Geddes is,
moving forward, it sounded like there was a bit of a bleak hope for another grant moving forward for a fire hall. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that it's something that we've sort of given up hope on, or do you think there's something else down the road that might come up?
Through the mayor, I'm always hopeful, but I don't know of any information of any more grants. That's the first one that I've seen in my career as a chief officer. Was the recent one that we weren't successful in. So, no idea, to be perfectly honest.
All right, I'd love to see some funding for this, whether it's HAF or we can put funds from parking towards this. But I'd also agree with Councillor Kennington that sometimes you'll see the RCMP building in Tofino with all the big LVT beams in front. It's a gorgeous building, but it might be a little bit overkill sometimes for such a utility that maybe we wouldn't have to be putting in quite as much money for such a fancy facade in the front of a building. But that's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
And I see in your report you've identified some cost-sharing agreements with ACRD and the Ucluelet Thought, so that could sort of play into the money aspect of it. And you've also identified Barclay Community Forest Funds, the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly gas tax, and then, of course, taxation is an option as well.
And through the mayor, just backing up, speaking to Mr. Lawrence's comments about business continuity during the construction. I know this is a long ways down the road, but that would be a cost included in the construction, the overall construction. There are provisions made for that in the federal feasibility plan that was done. That's listed in there as costing of business continuity during construction, whether it's temporary housing or whatever that looks like. In Bowen Island, they put up some temporary shelters and had some ATCO trailers, so they still had office space and things like that, which isn't ideal, but it gets you through the project, and knowing that the end result is well worth it. So,
great, thank you, Councillor Mafti.
I've one final question through the mayor. I remember from your initial presentation to council where you gave us a really good overview of how the department works. One of the things that struck me as really nice and productive was the agreement with our neighbors in Area C and UFN, to put fires out there. I'm wondering, since this is really at the end of the day a regional resource that's going to benefit everyone, if there might be any opportunities to look to some of our neighbors and say, hey, look, maybe you guys have a piece of land that would be suitable. I don't know how close the fire hall needs to be to the center of town or whatever. There must be logistical concerns, but is that something that is worth exploring that could possibly solve some of these issues if within the district we don't have a great number of choices about where to put a fire hall, but there's a great location that UFN or Area C might say, hey, we've got the land. If you guys build it and you'll still put out our fires, that could be a win-win. Is that something to pursue?
Through the mayor, there are restrictions on location of the fire hall for insurance purposes, and specifically for municipalities. So I haven't heard of that model, but mainly due to the limitations on location and proximity to the constituents that are paying for it, mainly. And just along those lines of thought, we would certainly be looking at our regional neighbors who we have service agreements to contribute, capital contribution towards any new projects such as this, because they are also going to benefit greatly from this facility.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, so this is these motions are to consider these things in the 5-year budget that's coming up. Is that correct?
Yes, through the mayor, I just wanted to have this initial chat before we got into budget season with all the other asks and wants and needs, and I thought it would be a good time to revisit the fire hall feasibility study as discussed at strategic planning, and just sort of get out the table that we really do need to consider moving forward on this one way or another.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So there are 2 recommendations, if council would like to move them.
Thing locks me out every time.
Yes.
Please, sir.
Councillor Anderson?
I recommend.
No, you have to move. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I move the council considers allocating up to $100,000 to engage a consultant to provide detailed design drawings and construction cost estimate for a new fire hall in the 2024 to 2028 financial plan.
Do I have a
I would also
seconder?
move-
No, we're going to do them one at a time, I think.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Councillor Mafty, any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, that carries. Go ahead.
I would also further move the council consider including the construction cost of a new fire hall in the 2024 to 2028 financial plan.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that as well.
Councillor Mafty, any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. Thank you, Chief Geddes. Are there any notices of motion?
Can we take a bio break before?
We could have a motion to take a 5-minute bio break.
I would move that.
Okay, do I have a seconder?
I will second that.
Councillor Mafty, all in favor? And that carries. 5. Be back at 6:10. All right, we'll bring this meeting back to order at 6:12. We have one correspondence item. Would council like to bring it forward for discussion?
I will say I don't disagree with the terminology. It does make a certain amount of sense. Just as a point of discussion.
The fossil gas terminology?
Fossil gas versus natural gas. Yeah.
Is my microphone on? It doesn't seem like it is.
I hear you.
Now it is.
Am I mistaken, or is this the second time this exact item has come before us? I remember it on a previous agenda.
It was a letter, I believe, to
Yeah,
us.
Yes.
Before
okay.
it.
All right.
All right, so we'll just leave that one be. We have 4 information items. Our first item is regarding development limits caused by sanitary sewer capacity. Mr. McIntosh, please provide an overview of your report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. The sanitary sewer system along the eastern side of the peninsula is currently at its design capacity. And no further developments upstream of this bottleneck can be brought online until additional capacity is added. The district currently has a couple of developments, one in the room this evening, which this capacity limitation would hinder its progress until solved. There are a couple of options available to increase capacity, which vary in scope and cost, complexity, and availability of installation. Financing those options are something that council and district staff have to consider and bring forward to council for consideration, and those are being currently investigated. So this report informs council of that current situation and potential next steps. So the sanitary system on the eastern side of the peninsula was originally installed in 1978. So it's really it was designed and sized for that era, the subdivisions, the density, the developments of that era. So since their installation, no further upgrades for size, capacity, or condition have been installed in that area, really to increase capacity. And while that's occurred, developments have been approved, subdivisions have been approved, and density has been added without the commensurate intake of fees or finance necessary to increase the sanitary sewer system along with that growth in sort of a lockstep development and growth manner. So the sanitary sewer systems components, specifically that I'm referring to today, on the eastern side of the peninsula, there are 4 of them of concern. The first is Hemlock Lift Station. It's at the bottom of Hemlock Street in the Inner Boat Basin. The second is Fraser Lift Station at the bottom of Fraser Lane in front of the Municipal Hall. And there are 2 main sewer lines, one running from Nora to Leach, and then the other running down Hemlock towards Hemlock Lift Station. So of most concern is Hemlock Lift Station. As I mentioned, it's reaching its design capacity.
And to illustrate or quantify that, the table on your slide in your report illustrates that well. It's showing us the design capacity at 29 liters per second for the lift station, and its current design inflow is at 27 liters per second. So what design capacity means is it's the available pumping capacity to the catchment area into the station, and when the design capacity is exceeded, we start to have risk of a surging event. So a hydraulic surge, essentially, the system is overflowing at that point. The district has received, as mentioned, development applications that would add to this system on the eastern side. Just for example, for a sense of scope and scale, the addition of the medical center at 2094 Peninsula Road, according to the site assessments completed, it would add about 2 liters per second into the system. So we can see that 27 liters per second quickly reaches and potentially exceeds the design capacity for Hemlock Lift Station. So it would further risk the whole system on the eastern side. The tool primarily that we have to assess capacity in our system and do engineering and design to try to install pipes and infrastructure and lift stations in line with development is our 30-year sanitary sewer master plan. We've just recently completed this last year, and of course the goal is to integrate those designs into our 5-year master plan, and then bring them into the capital plan rather, and then bring them to council and install them in line as development triggers their advancement. So in this area, we're behind, and so development has happened, infrastructure hasn't happened, it hasn't been upgraded appropriately to address this need, and we're sort of in between two large growth phases. So there are multiple solutions available to increase capacity in this area, as I mentioned. Next slide, please. And they are from our sanitary master plan. And so they range from small, really near-term immediate solution that we could implement to a longer-term, larger solution that we could implement as well that addresses capacity on a larger wholesale manner. So the smaller, near-term, most immediate and available solution would be to install a pipe from Norris Street to Rainforest Drive, and that would alleviate some capacity concerns off of the eastern side. And that solution is estimated to be anywhere from $200,000 to up to $800,000. Really, we have some field verifications to do to quantify that number and bring that number down to a closer, more realistic estimate. And then there's a larger there's a larger capacity upgrade that, if not needed today, it certainly is needed in the future, and it's to start upgrading the entire eastern side of the peninsula. So first step there would be to upgrade Hemlock Lift Station to a larger lift station, and then address the sanitary service pipes or mains rather that are associated with that lift station. So that cost starts to approach about $2.5 million. So what we're looking at to reduce capacity concerns on the eastern route for Peninsula Road, to approve developments north of Hemlock on Peninsula Road is one of these two projects. So it's either $200,000 or as high as $2.5 million. So what we like to do is just provide council with an update of the current situation, and then go back and determine the appropriate financing strategy to bring forward to council for further consideration, and then perhaps implement that into the 5-year capital plan, the 2024 capital plan. So there could be options such as we'll be looking at perhaps taxation. We'll be looking at cost sharing agreements with the developer. We'll be looking at what the developer could wear as burden and finance this project with maybe a front ender or latecomer agreement, something like that. So we have a couple of tools available, and we'll be determining what will be most optimum and available, and then bringing that to council. Of course, the timing of this isn't ideal. It's quite problematic, of course. And so what we have is a engineered design in concept, and it still has to be designed, financed, agreed upon, procured, and constructed and brought online and commissioned, really in line with the next development. So in this case, that would be the medical center. So at council's discretion, we'd be fast tracking that project and moving through the system as quickly as we could, if council desires. So I guess with that said, that's the situation for the sanitary system on the eastern side, and looking forward to bringing you more information, council, when we have a strategy in place. And do you have any questions for this evening?
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. I certainly like the sounds of 200,000 compared to 2.5 million.
Agreed.
And so you could certainly start with the 200,000, is that correct? That project?
Yes, so we have some field verifications to do that would determine the feasibility if that option is available. Things like checking the invert of a sanitary manhole, checking the pipe, checking the age and condition of it. And given that that all goes well in our favor, it's possible that we could do a short line from Rainforest Drive to Nora manhole. If that doesn't go well, we'll be back with a different recommendation.
Got it. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. McIntosh?
I have a quick one.
Councillor Anderson?
Is through the mayor, Mr. McIntosh, if I could ask, the development for the primary care network building, is this has to happen like upstream of that build? Is that correct? Right now there wouldn't be enough capacity with that building in play. Is that right?
Through the mayor to Councillor Anderson, yes, that's correct. So the system. Hemlock Lift Station is currently has an inflow of 27 liters per second, and its design capacity is 29 liters per second. And the medical center presents an outflow of about 2 liters per second. So yes, that's absolutely correct. We're really at the very edge of our design threshold that we would ever recommend being in. So we're at our limit essentially.
Right, and that doesn't include a place like the Monado Bay development, which would obviously be a big concern there as well. So I think this is. I'm always up for the long range plan when it comes to something like this. But is it? I guess my second follow-up question would be, if we go ahead with the Rainforest Nora, the cheaper option, does that preclude doing a long-term option? Like, is it one or the other kind of thing, or could you? I think you had mentioned that you could go in and take a look and see where we stand, or are we kind of shooting ourselves in the foot and blowing that 200,000 if we did look at it and say, oh, we actually do need the long-term plan?
Through the mayor. So what these designs are all sort of part and parcel of a larger scheme to move about 100 liters per second through our system as different developments come on board. And there are no inefficiencies in this Grand Master Plan. So they're all value added. They're all good value for money, and they're all needed. And so as different developments arise and the community grows in certain areas, we don't necessarily have that crystal ball. We have our OCP, of course, and we try our best for the long-range horizon. But as that evolves and grows and materializes in real terms, this master plan also has to sort of follow in alignment with that. So I guess the direct answer is doing a short line from Nora to Rainforest Drive is a good value-added opportunity. It takes It adds capacity to Peninsula Road, which seems to be currently under development and growing. And then as more development comes online, such as Monado Bay or other building permits and developments which we have on our longer term horizon, more capacity will have to be added as well, including some fairly significant steps to really bring Monado Bay on and Weyerhaeuser as well.
Right. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. McIntosh?
Yeah, through the mayor. So the quick, easy option really is just going to take care of this and maybe one other development at best. And and the long-range option obviously would take care of all of our future needs, Monado Bay and any of these. There's vacant lots all along Peninsula and then the Weyerhaeuser lands. So it would take care of all of that, and we wouldn't have to do this again. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, that's half correct and half not correct.
Okay.
Just to clarify, so the system needs a lot of extra capacity, and so to bring Monado Bay on and significant developments like Weyerhaeuser, it's likely going to require, so here's that crystal ball again, it's likely going to require a new sanitary line from Forbes Road up to the forest on a new road connecting to Peninsula Lift Station on Peninsula. So a whole new main trunk will be probably required to bring Monado Bay and Weyerhaeuser on. Again, we don't have that crystal ball exactly. It's about which development comes first and which servicing agreements make the most sense. So that route, which I just mentioned, is in our 30-year master plan. It's called option B, and triggered by development. Another option is that we could upsize all of the Eastern Peninsula, which would include Hemlock Lift Station, Fraser Lift Station, and other main trunks as well. So that's starting to exceed $2.5 million. The big upsizing capacity there is probably, it's getting close to $4 or $5 million now. It's really becoming a significant figure. Mm-hmm. So in big terms, the next big moves are upsizing the eastern side or that main trunk that comes down to Forbes. And then in between, we have some smaller pieces to get us through.
Right. Yeah, it just related to the Housing Accelerator Fund and what we're aiming towards, which is a higher density option, and it's really all focused in that one area. So it's a bit of a concern if we're saying we want to speed up development in that area, but not doing the necessary work to make sure we can actually do that in a timely fashion, as opposed to waiting until those developments really come online, which we know they're gonna happen because they have to happen. It seems like money would be better spent taking that $200,000, putting it into the larger pot, and just getting it done once and for all.
And a question, would development DCCs not contribute to some of this infrastructure upgrade?
So the yes and no. So the current developments that we have in front of us, we're here for today, just immediately in front of us, aren't contributing in a significant manner to our development cost charges program. As well, our development cost charges program is evolving from a place of kind of early beginnings to we're now getting ready to really ramp it up, go for an RFP, hire a consultant, get the right fees in place, get the right structure, charge it every time at the right place, and start to build our reserve. So we're just sort of in the beginning phases of getting that all in place now. And our master plans that I'm referring to are also part of that. So we need our master plans in place, those long-term infrastructure plans to then inform the schedules of our development cost charges. So we have a couple of options to facilitate the financing of these projects as they come on board. Certainly the bigger development projects such as Monado Bay and Weyerhaeuser, yes, absolutely. We'll be implementing probably different financing structures to get those developments through. There'll be a significant amount of development cost charges coming from those properties. for the ones that are right in front of us today, these small developments, we're really struggling with, I guess, the historical symptoms of not taking in the right fees at the right time and dedicating them to infrastructure. So we'll probably be recommending. I'm kind of reading the room. I think it'll likely be a small step that is good for the community and allows us to move forward. But also immediately after that, what's the big step that really allows for growth? I share that now today. That's kind of where I'm at today. But all for council's discretion.
Could I ask one more through the mayor? So there's this baby step. So let's say we do that, and then another smaller development comes along that just puts us over the edge. Are there other smaller incremental changes that we can make for these lower dollar amounts to sort of gradually work up to the Monado Bay of projects? Or is this the one and only opportunity we have to create a little capacity?
Through the mayor, I think there's probably maybe the wholesale upgrade of upsizing the eastern side of the peninsula, which includes Hemlock, Fraser Lift Station, and a couple of mains. That can probably be broken up into a couple of manageable pieces. And so as we upsize one component, it creates issues on the next downstream component. And so that sort of creates this cascading upgrading effect, which is what this master plan is all about. You upsize one and you have problems in another area. So it likely lends itself to a continuum of large upgrades in select areas and then smaller incremental pieces in other areas. So on the eastern side, I would foresee us probably upgrading Hemlock Lift Station, let's say in 2025 or something like that, and then Fraser Lift Station in 2027 in the capital plan, and along the way some main trunks as well that allow that to all work well. Maybe there's a large capital opportunity that comes our way, and we find ourselves with $7 million to spend. I don't have that crystal ball.
Thank you. $50 parking passes.
Or just no pooping. If you're a visitor, you can't. That's it. Just hold it.
Any other questions for Mr. McIntosh? No? Well, thank you very much for your report. It's very sobering.
Thank you, Mayor.
Our second item is regarding the CHMC Housing Accelerator Fund Action Plan. Mr. Gregg, welcome back.
Thank you, and I'll share a couple slides here. Bit of a lag. There we are. So the Housing Accelerator Fund is a grant opportunity that I'm not sure what the flashing is. That we have submitted an application to CMHC. We're hoping to hear November, December. You always kind of have to wait and see when the things are actually announced. They're starting to announce for some larger communities, and really this is a program that was, as was described to council back in June. It's a little distracting, the flashing on the screen there, but I don't think it's my computer causing that. This is a grant that is unlike some of the others that we see, where it's not about a capital project where you're showing shovel-ready plans. It really is, how are you going to transform your organization, and will, as I've said before, bribe you with a bunch of cash for accelerating how housing gets approved. And so we've looked at it, and we've basically had an outline of it in front of council, and this is really just a chance to update on some of the details. So really what they're looking for is what's the plan of action to change how we look at housing approvals in particular that could speed it up. And so that the action areas, there's 6 of them that are in the application, around streamlining and permitting processes, realigning regulations to match housing needs, creating housing incentives, aligning infrastructure priorities, as we've been hearing. And I'm just going to sidebar note that, of course, as a sort of the plug for, well, okay, we have some issues. How do we create housing? And we have aging infrastructure. The infrastructure is aging anyways, so is always a better thing, I think, to do infill and trying to tie new development with aging infrastructure, although that can be awkward at times, and the timing is really the key. It's far better than we'll develop over in a new area instead. You still have the old infrastructure to upgrade. But it's a wicked challenge for not just Euclid, but for many communities, most, I'd say. Getting back to our task, so that aligning infrastructure so that it can support housing is part of what we're proposing. Directly developing or supporting the development of affordable housing, non-market housing, and also improving the regional context for housing. There are a couple of slides which are probably very, very small in the council package. I'm going to see if I can zoom in on a little bit of this. Here we are. So this is essentially the application is a web-based platform that we have to sort of fill in the boxes, and so we're forced into this. So essentially, what the application is a component of what is your past statistics on development of housing, and what are you projecting, and how are you sort of justifying those changes. So based on the last 5 and 10 years, we're roughly 25 units per year. So that would be that little top number there. The 75 would be what it would be projected if there were no changes over the next 3 years. And our application projects that really the difference would be this 270 number that's floating down here. So essentially an additional 90 per year, so about a 360% change. And then they have a whole bunch of detail that would show and where those areas are expected. And then then there's a formula that comes into this, and I think this is where some of the details that are the capital projects also were showing up. That we'll zoom in a little here. That by their calculation, the grant amount they're looking at is just over $9 million. So if it were accepted, that's what we'd be looking at. And then they ask for a funding plan of what are you going to do with all of that money. And so this is what this is breaking down. Is that over basically the first 3 years is about a quarter of the funding would go to support the HALF program, which would be essentially giving us the capacity to make and accelerate some of the changes around development applications, around processing and servicing. So that's time and person power to do that work. So whether it's a consultant or staff, that's a piece of it. The other part of that, and the cost there, the $700,000 to $840,000, is there are some incentive programs that we had sort of, when you get into the details, the lines of looking at incentives for things like legalizing or creating secondary suites or accessory dwelling units, those sort of things. We've sort of earmarked, okay, if there's a certain portion of money to create those incentives, what would that look like? And then the bulk of the funding, the larger amounts, are for affordable housing, infrastructure, so things like water and sewer pipes, and also the $1 million at the bottom line there was related infrastructure, which isn't necessarily the pipes in the ground, but also community things, where essentially growth of housing, so whether it's recreation, trails, those sorts of things. Could there be an allotment for that? And they asked for, I don't know if I'm trying to change the view here. This list of, and I think this was really the federal government looking for any sort of detail or data they could glean. Apparently, this was not part of the actual decision making on the application. But they're just basically saying any capital projects that you're aware of that you might use some of the funding for. Tell us what's out there. What challenges are you facing? Because they of course are operating numerous grant programs, and so they're looking at, okay, is it fire halls? Is it sewer replacement? Is it, what are the different things that municipalities are actively looking for? So they were wanting that kind of laundry list. So we sort of quickly threw together, a number of the ones of which we were aware. So in a nutshell, the HAF program is really a way of encapsulating a whole bunch of work that we think we need to do anyways, and we're planning on doing. It's a matter of accelerating it if we have the funding and the capacity, the support to do it. And I think one of the things we wanted the information just to have a little more detail in front of council to keep it in mind. And within the details, I think that arguably all of the changes that are contemplated within things like bylaws, delegated authorities, changes in our regulations, and updating our processes, they're all good things to do. It's just that there's only so much time and so if these are being done off the side of the desk or being done at with other challenges, it may take some years. As I think I said in the report, it may take 10 years to sort of whittle away at these things. And the additional funding would certainly allow us to do that much faster. We think it's a long shot. Every community in the country, I think, would like this funding and is going for it. So it really, there's you never know. I mean, they're starting to announce for some of the larger communities, and really haven't gotten around to, as I've seen, I haven't seen any announcements of small communities yet. So we're hopeful, but it's worth thinking about, okay, if we don't get the funding, these are still worthwhile. They would still help with the housing situation. If there's, it's probably just our food for thought and discussion around, okay, which then are things that we need to do and prioritize as our capacity allows, and what are some alternative ways of approaching that. Other than that, I just see if there's any questions.
Thank you. I guess it was a good exercise, regardless whether we get the funding or not.
If we don't get the funding, I'd say, it's a painful exercise, because every time you do one of these grants, it's 2 or 3 weeks of rushed work to get it all together. But it wasn't a chance. It wasn't saying that facetiously, but it really wasn't a matter of, let's make up a new program. It really was a way to encapsulate and sort of gather all the things that are on our whiteboards of, hey, we really need to do this and update and modernize all these different parts of the organization. How do we sort of gather it all together? Because if there is funding, let's use it to accelerate that.
And it's all or nothing, correct? Like they either give us the 9 million or we'd get nothing.
Yes, but they're small print. I mean, certainly every time there's a grant like this, they reserve themselves the right to adjust funding amounts depending on uptake and depending on who knows. I mean, so it could be that they come back and say, well, we had such large, interest, we can't fund everyone, so we're giving everybody half, or I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say it's absolute one way or another. If there was, I think that definitely this was put together with some serious thought to what are the hours that it would take to do some of these things. It would be very aggressive to meet the timelines, because it's reporting out over 3 years, and so the application goes into great detail of, like, when are you hitting certain milestones. You have to report out for 6 months, year, what are you seeing, and then you're tracking what sort of development activity you're seeing. If there was less funding, we'd have to look at, okay, well, what actually works.
Great. I think it was when we were at AVICC last April, and this program was announced, and there was a lot of confusion about how to fill out these forms and what would it cover, and how do you, like, I just remember being in a room. I think that it was actually a workshop on how to apply for this program, and there was a lot of confusion. So my fingers are crossed that you got it right, and a whole bunch of other communities couldn't quite figure it out.
Maybe. We know that they received it. We got some feedback. There was one area where they were asking for more information, so we gave them more information, and then it goes quiet, and you cross your fingers and you wait.
Exactly. Any questions for Mr. Gregg?
Yes, through the mayor. the initiatives included in the action plan. So is this the bullet list that you provided them?
Yes.
Okay. So
And they have all this terminology around initiatives and milestones, and essentially, yes, these are the things, the tasks we would tackle.
and when you say tackle, like I see some rezoning components to this, which typically have to come in front of council. Are we promising something that we can't necessarily deliver, depending on public feedback to bylaw changes and rezonings?
You can through the mayor, you can never promise a rezoning or a bylaw. I mean, that is entirely council's prerogative, and so, but a number of the things that are identified are updating bylaws. So, so that, and the federal government recognizes that. But so essentially what it says though is that we're going to try, we're going to tackle it, we'll bring it forward. And yes, if the public says, no, we don't want this thing, and council says, well, we're not going to adopt it. Well, okay, we tried. So it doesn't tie the hands of council or the community necessarily, or force the community to do certain things. It really says, let's take a good hard look at it and bring it forward. But the funding isn't like, here you are on day one, here's all of it either. That's why we have to report out of like, okay, in 6 months, did you bring a whole whack of bylaws to council, and are they moving forward? And okay, a year later, did they get adopted? And it could affect the actual funding if those things aren't happening in one form or another.
So you've just essentially, well, not just, you've presented a list of possible routes that we could take to speed up housing.
Exactly, and
it's not a commitment to every single one of these. It's just like, here are the areas we've identified where we could make a difference.
And through the mayor, I'd say it's a commitment to try all of them, and it doesn't tie the hands of council to say you must adopt a new DCC bylaw or something like that. But bringing it forward is something that we would certainly do. I think if there were half backlash in town or something, and so if nothing were moving forward that is going to result in a change that could mean more housing units in town, if there wasn't, and it wasn't happening, then I don't think we would receive all the funding. I mean, I think they want to see it actually translate into more streamlined processes, and that's what we've aimed at.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Gregg?
Quick one, if I...
Councillor Anderson?
Oh, so, through the mayor, I remember being at the AVICC workshop, and the gal that was actually presenting, or from CMHC, I think she had difficulty in even describing some of the criterion. But so my question is, I don't even know if you can answer this, Mr. Gregg, but what was the capital project that they asked for more information on? Can I ask that?
And so through the mayor, it wasn't a capital project that they asked for detail on. And as I understand how we spend the money, they're not so fussed about it. It's what are the actions we're taking to change the organization, and how we together through all our departments, because this isn't just a planning exercise. This is a finance, engineering, corporate services, public works. It's going to affect the whole organization to make that kind of change in a rapid way, and become more streamlined and more coordinated in our work, I think. But so they had some questions around little more like, okay, in this one area, what are your milestone timelines? Fill in the blanks a little more. It wasn't around how are you going to spend the money, and as we've been told, at least as presented, that's less of their concern. I mean, they have some broad categories around infrastructure and certainly using it for things like offset the cost of a building permit for an accessory dwelling unit or a secondary suite, that kind of thing. They're thrilled. Great, directly influencing and encouraging someone to build more housing. But it doesn't all have to be used on that. It can be used for things like infrastructure deficits and land acquisition. That's why the affordable housing piece, I think we just showed $3 million, because we know we're going to need to buy land and service it to see some of the nonprofit housing that comes forward. So that's an opportunity to look seriously at that. And if we get the grant, I should say, sorry, I'm not sure. I should ask if I've answered your question before I just keep rolling with information. But if we get the funding, then that's entirely something that comes forward through the budget process of, okay, now exactly what's this used for? That's in council's hands.
So just a quick follow-up question to that is, if we don't get it, is this a one-time deal with the HF, or will we have a chance to reapply in the future? Do you know?
As we understand, this is a one-shot deal that the CMHC is bringing forward. That they're saying this is a one-time because of the housing crisis, and the goal of it is definitely to create housing, but also to change the way the whole ecosystem of decision making, if I can use that term, happens around local zoning, development permits, application processes. Because I think it's one of the things the federal government has heard from the development community is often things get hung up at the local level. We've certainly seen that in BC with some of the changes the province has undertaken, and how they're putting direct pressure on municipalities to approve more housing and more rezonings for housing. And so this is partly aimed at that, of saying, okay, well, here's a carrot as opposed to a stick. This is a carrot for transforming your municipality in some ways to be more open and streamlined for creating housing. And we've had this discussion a bit of like, okay, well, growth can be good or bad. It is change. And so if it's focused on the growth of the housing that's needed and is missing, we have a gap in town and on the West Coast. If it works, then if it is truly aimed at that need, then it seems like this is an opportunity that we couldn't not apply for.
Thank you, and good job on that application. I went over it a couple times, and you did a good job filling that out. Everything's in there. It was, fingers are crossed.
Any other questions for Mr. Gregg? Thank you so much for that report. That was really a good read.
Okay, thanks.
There are two additional information items. One is the North Island College Working Together Community Lunch on Friday, November 3rd, 12 till 2. Councillor Hoare is attending.
Yeah, I'm already registered.
And I'm registered. Anyone else? No. And the last one, the National Veterans Week Speakers Program. We just saw this, I'm sure, in our last agenda.
Yep.
Yeah, and the suggestion was to forward it to the school. Council committee reports. Councillor Anderson.
Not too much on my end. I did an ACHN meeting from down here on Zoom, and that was enlightening. It was with Marcy and the team there. So we went over some of the strategic plan that we've been working on for the last, I guess, month or so. There was a survey that went out and interviews with the table of partners, and there was a series of responses that came back from the public, and she used Chat GPT to do the analysis on that. That was pretty interesting. So that covered everything from transportation advocacy, youth engagement, poverty reduction. We went over building equity in the 59th parallel, has put together a development project, and then it was talking about community building, youth futures, and basically just went around the group, and everyone did their updates, and I think that's it for me.
Great, thank you. And when do you return home?
November 4th.
Great.
I'm back. Yeah.
Awesome. Councillor Hoare.
Not much to report, although I did attend the Harbour Authority meeting, as we all did last week. And I have reading on herring spawning on pilings, thanks to our harbor manager and our manager of Parks and Rec and Tourism. So,
And do you have some information for us?
not yet. Literally, it was in my inbox during this meeting. So,
Great, we'll look forward to that. Councillor Kennington?
Nothing to report at this time.
Councillor Mafty?
In addition to the Harbor Authority meeting, I attended a portion of the CBT's regional forum last week. It was my intention to attend in person, and I had to go to Vic unexpectedly for a non-threatening family emergency, but I was able to Zoom in, and I was able to also correspond with a bunch of the other folks presenting. It was really interesting. There's a ton of work going on in the region, and it's just a reflection on how busy people are, that a lot of the projects that are ongoing are perhaps not communicated as widely as they could be or should be. And so it was really nice to get a better understanding of what other research, conservation, stewardship initiatives are being undertaken in the region by a variety of different partners and organizations, nonprofits, the nation, the CBT, researchers from academic institutions. It was really quite interesting. I really hope they do it again. And although there wasn't anything that was immediately directly relevant to what we do here in Ucluelet, certainly at the regional level, it's encouraging that there's a lot of interest and activity to get a better understanding of what's happening in terms of the ecology and how we can factor that into ultimately planning decisions.
Great, thank you. I was hoping to attend in person as well and just couldn't make it, but I'm hoping that they will do a follow-up report as to what sort of things came out of that.
Yeah, I haven't heard if that's on the docket or not, but I would venture to suggest that if nothing else, Janessa could give you a rundown of who presented and what they had to say.
That'd be great. I've asked her for that. Great, thank you. For me, October 11th, I went to the Barclay Community Forest Corporation meeting. They are still wanting to have a tour for council in the community forest. If it's going to happen this fall, it would have to be before November 6th, when their chief forester is taking off on holidays. So I might suggest that we reschedule for the spring and take a look at our schedules in the spring, and hopefully we can all get together and have a tour out there. They do have firewood available. You just look on their website, and that'll tell you how to get a ticket to access their firewood. October 11th, I attended the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District meeting by Zoom. Nothing that really affected the West Coast too much. October 15th, I helped out at the Edge to Edge finish line, as did the rest of us.
I always forget about these things.
Yes. We were all there except for Councillor Anderson, but there's always next year, Councillor Anderson. October 16th, I attended the Ministry of Housing briefing on the new rules surrounding short-term rentals, and there was some really interesting information brought out from that. Particularly, I thought the fact that they're no longer grandfathering someone in, and that was, and they're not even allowing the previous grandfathered people to be grandfathered. Anyway, October 19th, Harbor Authority meeting. Yesterday, I attended the Wild Pacific Trail ribbon cutting at the second Crow's Nest on the Artist Loops. It was a beautiful, gorgeous sunny day. The whole board and their spouses were out for that. And then that was at 2 o'clock, and then at 4 o'clock, they had their annual general meeting here at the community center. And tomorrow, I'm off to Nanaimo for the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance Summit, as is Councillor Anderson, correct?
Kennington.
Or Kennington, sorry, I'm looking at you and saying his name. Councillor Kennington, yes. Yes, it should be good. And that's it for me. So, question period. This is an opportunity for the public to ask questions about matters within council's jurisdiction. Representations about matters that have been the subject of a public hearing are not permitted at this time. Are there any questions from the audience? You're it. Are there any questions by Zoom or telephone?
Please click the raise your hand icon if you'd like to ask a question. No hands are raised at this time.
And have we received any questions via email to communityinput@ucluelet.ca?
Yes, actually, we received one email with a couple questions in it. I'll read it right now. Okay, so this email is from Matt Harbage. I believe council already received this email because it looks like they were all individually emailed, but it has now been received to the community input mailbox. It reads, so the house number is not on the email, but the email reads, "Hello all. Just out of curiosity, I'm wondering how we got on the path of a new fire hall. A price tag of $6 million seems like quite a hefty price tag. Is the old hall leaking or rotten? If it's a matter of a new bay or one larger truck, can it not be added on? Also, I don't think citizens are looking for an architectural marvel. He steel building that the rented center is in would be about 1.2 to 1.5 to build, plus some finishing touches. It could be built above the district works yard and even house BC ambulance. Also, this means the existing fire could be used until completion without the hefty rental bill, in quotations. This would also free up some land for an affordable housing project in a decent serviced location. Just some thoughts. Thanks, Matt Harbage, Green World Building."
Thank you. We did all receive that earlier this afternoon, and Councillor Anderson was, that was what he was referring to during the fire hall conversation, correct?
Yes, indeed.
Perfect. All right. We have no closed session, so this regular council meeting is adjourned at 7:03.
Thanks.
Awesome.